I don't care what time it is in Seoul. Call them now! Alexander Kane's voice shattered Bernardin's crystal elegance. His $500 million Samsung deal crumbled through the phone. 8-year-old Sophia cowered in burgundy velvet, tears streaming down porcelain cheeks. Do you people know who I am? I could buy this entire restaurant right now! Every fork suspended mid-air. Every phone lifted to record. The young waitress with tired eyes stepped forward, her name tag reading Ruby. I don't allow you to touch my daughter! Alexander roared when Ruby knelt beside the sobbing child. Then Ruby spoke one sentence that made every heart in the restaurant stop beating. Mr. Kane, Sophia hasn't eaten anything for 2 days because she's terrified of becoming like you. The entire restaurant froze in absolute silence. Alexander's phone clattered against marble like breaking bones. The Samsung executives heard only dead air as his empire threatened to crumble. Ruby's words echoed through Manhattan's most exclusive dining room with the finality of a judge's gavel. 2 days without food. His daughter was starving herself from fear. The blood drained from his face as if someone had opened his veins. His $3,000 suit suddenly felt like a costume from a play he no longer wanted to perform. Ruby remained kneeling beside Sophia, weathered hands gentle on trembling shoulders. The child's sobs had quieted to hiccups, but her tiny frame shook like autumn leaves. Alexander noticed details he'd been blind to for months, how the designer dress hung loose on her shrinking body, the dark circles beneath cornflower blue eyes that once sparkled with Isabella's joy. The way Sophia flinched each time his voice rose above normal conversation. When had he become the monster his own daughter feared? The manager hovered nearby, face twisted between professional concern and barely concealed terror. This was Alexander Kane, the tech billionaire who could destroy Le Bernardin with one bad review. Yet here stood this nobody waitress, speaking truth like a sword through his chest. Other diners sat frozen, expensive meals growing cold, afraid to breathe. Some still held phones aloft, recording what might become the most viral meltdown in recent memory. The golden chandeliers seemed to dim, as if the very building mourned. Ruby, Alexander whispered, his voice stripped of all thunder. How do you know my daughter hasn't been eating? His throat felt raw from screaming at phantoms while his real world collapsed. The name on her badge tickled memory's edges like a half-forgotten dream. Where had he heard that name before? Why did those tired brown eyes seem to hold secrets he'd lost? The familiarity gnawed at him like hunger, insistent and uncomfortable. Ruby rose slowly, knees creaking from long hours on restaurant floors. She smoothed her black apron with hands that had seen too much work, too much worry. Because I've been watching her, Mr. Kane. Watching her push food around plates while you scream into that phone. Her voice carried no accusation, only sadness that seemed to seep into marble walls. She told me she doesn't want to grow up angry like Daddy. The words hit Alexander like physical blows, each syllable a small death. Angry like Daddy. When had he become the villain in his daughter's story? He remembered Isabella's gentle voice, her soft laughter filling their Central Park penthouse. She used to calm his storms with just a touch, just a knowing look. But Isabella was gone, 18 months in the ground, and he'd let grief transform him into something unrecognizable, something his own child couldn't bear to become. The realization felt like swallowing broken glass, sharp and impossible to digest. Sophia finally looked up, blue eyes swimming with tears that reflected restaurant's golden glow. Daddy? She whispered, voice barely audible above air conditioning's hum. I'm sorry I made you mad. I didn't mean to be bad. The simple words shattered what remained of Alexander's composure. His little girl was apologizing for his monstrous behavior, taking blame for his failures. What kind of father had he become? What would Isabella think of the man sitting in this chair? Alexander sank into leather as if his strings had been cut. The seat felt cold against his back, or maybe the chill came from within. Sophia, sweetheart, you didn't do anything wrong. Daddy was wrong. Daddy was very, very wrong. His voice cracked like ice under pressure, and he realized tears were falling. When had he last cried? At Isabella's funeral, probably, before he'd locked his heart away beneath spreadsheets and conference calls. Before grief had transformed him into this unrecognizable creature of rage and isolation. Ruby moved with quiet efficiency, signaling the busboy to clear broken crystal. Her movements were economical and sure, practiced from countless shifts cleaning other people's messes. But her eyes never left Sophia's face, watching with guardian angel intensity. "Mr. Kane," she said softly, "may I suggest something simple for Sophia? Chicken broth, perhaps? Something gentle on an empty stomach?" The kindness in her voice made Alexander's chest tight with emotions he'd forgotten how to name. When had he last heard someone speak with such genuine care? "You know what's best for her," Alexander admitted, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. For months, maybe years, he'd tried controlling everything with money and power and volume. But this stranger, this waitress, understood his daughter better than he did. The realization was humbling and terrifying and somehow, inexplicably, a relief. Maybe he didn't have to carry the world's weight alone. Maybe he'd been drowning when he could have been floating, fighting currents when he should have been swimming. Ruby disappeared toward the kitchen, moving through table mazes with practiced grace. Other diners had resumed conversations, but volume remained subdued, as if the entire restaurant walked on eggshells. Alexander reached across white tablecloth, his hand stopping just short of Sophia's small fingers. "May I hold your hand, sweetheart?" he asked, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. When had he started asking permission to touch his own daughter? When had love become a negotiation instead of a given? Sophia's hand felt so small in his, fingers like twigs that might break if he squeezed too hard. Her skin was cool, too cool, and he could feel delicate bones beneath paper-thin flesh. She'd lost weight. How much weight? How long had he been too busy screaming at the world to notice his daughter disappearing? "Daddy," she said quietly, "Miss Ruby is nice. She reminds me of someone, but I can't remember who." The comment sent chills down Alexander's spine that had nothing to do with restaurant air conditioning. Miss Ruby. Why did that name combination sound so familiar, like an echo from a life he'd forgotten? He studied the waitress as she spoke quietly with the chef, her profile triggering memories he couldn't quite grasp. There was something about her movements, the tilt of her head, the gentle authority in her gestures, like watching a ghost from a past he'd buried beneath 18 months of grief and rage. The recognition hovered just beyond reach, maddening in its elusiveness. Ruby returned carrying a steaming bowl of golden broth and toasted bread cut into star shapes. She set the meal before Sophia with communion-offering reverence. "The chef made this especially for you," she said, pulling out a chair and sitting uninvited at their table. The audacity should have enraged Alexander, but instead gratitude flooded through him. "Small sips, little one. Let your tummy remember how to be happy again." Her voice held the musical quality of someone who'd spent years comforting frightened children. Sophia picked up the spoon with both hands, movements careful and deliberate as a sacred ritual. She sipped broth like liquid gold, and Alexander watched color slowly return to pale cheeks. Each small swallow felt miraculous, like watching his daughter return from the dead. "It's good," Sophia whispered, and Ruby smiled with such genuine joy that Alexander felt his heart crack open just a little wider. Hope was a dangerous emotion for broken men, but he felt it stirring anyway. "Ruby," Alexander said carefully, testing the name like a half-remembered song. "Have we met before? There's something about you that seems—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound insane to a stranger. "Familiar." Ruby's hand stilled on the table, and for one heartbeat, her composed mask slipped. Pain flashed across weathered features, raw and fresh as an open wound. Then the moment passed, and she was just a tired waitress again, expertly neutral. "I don't think so, Mr. Kane," Ruby said, but her eyes avoided his like guilty secrets. "I would remember meeting someone like you." Something in her tone, a carefully controlled neutrality, made Alexander's skin prickle with unease. She was lying with professional skill. He'd built an empire reading people, detecting microscopic tells that revealed truth from fiction. Ruby was hiding something significant, something that involved him and possibly his daughter. The mystery gnawed at him like physical hunger. Sophia had managed half the bowl and one star-shaped bite when she looked up at Ruby, with eyes suddenly seeming much older than 8 years. "Miss Ruby, do you know any stories? Mommy used to tell me stories when I was sad." The request was innocent enough, but Ruby's reaction was anything but simple. She went pale as parchment, hands beginning to tremble against white tablecloth like leaves in winter wind. Whatever Sophia had triggered, it cut deep. "What kind of stories did your mummy tell you?" Ruby asked, voice barely above a whisper. Alexander leaned forward, sensing something important happening, some crucial piece of a puzzle he didn't know he was solving. Sophia's face brightened for the first time all evening, animated by memory of her mother's voice, her mother's endless love. The transformation was beautiful and heartbreaking, innocence shining through months of accumulated fear and confusion. "She told me about the angry dragon who forgot he was really kind inside," Sophia said, spooning more broth with growing enthusiasm. "The dragon would breathe fire when he was scared or sad, but a little girl taught him how to breathe nice air instead. Mommy said everybody has a dragon inside, but we get to choose if it's mean or nice." Ruby's cup rattled against saucer as she set it down, her carefully maintained composure finally, completely shattered. Her face had gone white as fresh snow. Alexander felt the world tilt on its axis like a ship in a storm. The angry dragon story. He'd never heard Isabella tell that particular tale, had been too busy with mergers and acquisitions to listen to bedtime stories. But Ruby had gone ghost pale, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, as if she couldn't get enough air. "Ruby," he said slowly, pieces clicking together like tumblers in a complex lock. "Are you all right?" Even as he asked, understanding began dawning like sunrise after the longest night. "I need some air," Ruby whispered, standing so quickly her chair scraped against marble with fingernails on chalkboard intensity. But Sophia reached out with surprising speed, catching Ruby's wrist with her small hand. The touch seemed to anchor the woman, pulling her back from whatever precipice she'd been approaching. "Please don't go, Miss Ruby," Sophia said with simple childhood wisdom. "The dragon story always made me feel better. Maybe it will make you feel better too." The words hung in air like prayer. Ruby sank back into her chair as if her legs had given out entirely. She stared at Sophia with an expression Alexander couldn't decode. Love and pain and recognition all tangled together like barbed wire around his heart. "Your mummy told you that story?" Ruby asked, and her voice sounded like speaking through tears. "What else did she tell you about the dragon?" The question carried weight beyond its simple words, as if entire universes hung in the balance of Sophia's answer. Sophia brightened like sunrise, eager to share her mother's precious wisdom. Mommy said the dragon lived in a beautiful castle, but he was very lonely because everyone was afraid of his fire. Then one day, a little girl came to visit, and she wasn't scared at all. She said, "Mr. Dragon, I think you're sad, not mean." And the dragon started to cry because nobody had ever understood him before. Words poured from Sophia like water from a broken dam, and with each sentence, Ruby seemed to shrink into herself. Alexander watched Ruby's face transform as Sophia spoke, recognition dawning like sunrise after the longest night. There was something about that story, something about Ruby's reaction that made his chest tight with unnamed emotion. "Ruby," he said carefully, voice gentle now, stripped of all earlier thunder. "How do you know that story?" He could see she was fragile as spun glass, one wrong word away from complete collapse. The mystery was unraveling, but he sensed the truth might destroy them all. "Because," Ruby whispered, voice breaking like waves against rocks. "I told that story to your wife when she was worried about helping Sophia deal with anger. When Isabella was scared that Sophia might learn to fear strong emotions instead of understanding them." The restaurant seemed to spin around Alexander's head like a carnival ride. Ruby knew Isabella, had known his wife well enough to share parenting advice, to create stories together. The implications crashed over him like tsunami waves. Memory hit Alexander like lightning striking twice in the same place. Ruby Patterson, Miss Ruby from Riverside Montessori School. The teacher Isabella had praised endlessly, the woman who'd understood Sophia better than anyone else in the world. The teacher who'd mysteriously disappeared right when Alexander had needed stability most, right after Isabella's funeral when Sophia had been spiraling into grief and confusion. The pieces assembled themselves with devastating clarity, showing him the scope of his blindness. "You're Sophia's teacher," Alexander breathed, words feeling like puzzle pieces clicking into perfect, painful place. "You taught her at Montessori. Isabella talked about you constantly, said you were the only person who truly understood our daughter." Ruby nodded through streaming tears, her careful composure completely abandoned. "She said you saved Sophia during the worst days, when Isabella was too sick to help." The weight of missed connections, of opportunities lost to grief's tunnel vision, settled on his shoulders like lead blankets. "I tried," Ruby whispered, voice catching on words like fishhooks. "I tried so hard to help her through those months when Isabella was hospitalized. Sophia would cry every day after school, asking why Mommy couldn't pick her up anymore. I would hold her until you or the nanny arrived, sometimes for hours." Her voice broke completely, and Alexander realized she'd been grieving too, mourning the loss of a friend and the child she'd had to abandon. The parallel losses created a terrible symmetry. Sophia looked back and forth between the adults, young mind struggling to understand emotional currents flowing around the table like riptides. "Miss Ruby was my teacher?" she asked, wonder creeping into her voice like dawn light. "Miss Ruby, I remember you. You made the best snacks, and you always smelled like vanilla." The simple declaration broke something loose in Ruby's chest, and she sobbed openly now, reaching across table to touch Sophia's face with trembling fingers. The reunion was beautiful and heartbreaking in equal measure. "I've missed you so much, little star," Ruby whispered, using a pet name that made Sophia giggle with delight, despite the tears around her. "I've thought about you every single day since I had to leave." Alexander felt like watching a reunion between long-lost family members, and the love flowing between Ruby and his daughter was so pure it made his eyes burn. "Why did you have to leave, Miss Ruby? Did I do something bad?" Sophia's question carried the weight of childhood guilt, the assumption that adult departures were somehow her fault. "No, sweetheart, never," Ruby said fiercely, voice suddenly strong with protective love. "You could never do anything to make me stop loving you. I had to take care of my daddy because he got sick, very sick, and he needed me all the time." She looked at Alexander then, and he saw exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of carrying impossible burdens alone. I couldn't afford to keep teaching. I had to find work that paid more, gave me more hours. The practical cruelty of economics had stolen this woman from his daughter when Sophia needed her most. Alexander felt shame wash over him like acid rain, burning away pretense and privilege. While he'd been drowning in his own grief, building walls of rage and money around his pain, Ruby had been sacrificing everything to care for her father. She'd left teaching, left children she loved, left Sophia right when his daughter needed her most. Now she was working as a waitress, probably making a fraction of teaching salary, probably struggling every day to make ends meet while he threw tantrums about delayed appetizers. "What happened to your father?" Alexander asked gently, though he dreaded the answer written in Ruby's grief-stricken features. Her face crumpled with fresh sorrow, and he knew before she spoke that this story didn't have a happy ending. "Alzheimer's," she said simply, the word dropping like a stone into still water. "He died 6 months ago. He forgot everything at the end, my name, my face, even his own reflection. But he never forgot how to be kind. Even when his mind was gone, his heart remained gentle." The parallel wasn't lost on Alexander, striking him like lightning in clear skies. Ruby's father had forgotten everything but retained kindness, while Alexander remembered everything, but had forgotten how to be gentle. The irony was bitter as burnt coffee, and he wondered if Isabella was somewhere watching, hoping he might learn from this broken angel she'd placed in their path. "Ruby, I'm so sorry. For your loss, and for—" He gestured helplessly at the space between them. "For not knowing. For not helping when you needed it most." "You couldn't have known," Ruby said, but there was no absolution in her voice, just exhausted acceptance of life's casual cruelties. "You were dealing with your own tragedy. Isabella's death devastated everyone who knew her. She was the kind of person who made the world brighter just by existing in it." She looked at Sophia, who was listening with the intense focus children brought to adult mysteries. "Your mummy loved you more than all the stars in the sky, little one. She used to say you were her greatest masterpiece." Sophia nodded solemnly, as if this was information she carried like treasure in her heart. "Daddy said Mummy had to go be an angel, but I think she sent Miss Ruby to take care of us instead." The innocent observation hit both adults like physical blows, truth delivered with childhood's devastating clarity. Alexander had to grip the table edge to keep from falling apart completely. Out of mouths of babes came wisdom that could shatter grown men into component pieces and rebuild them into something better. "Sophia," Alexander said carefully, voice thick with emotions he was still learning to name. "Would you like Miss Ruby to come have dinner with us sometimes? Would that make you happy?" He couldn't look at Ruby as he asked, couldn't bear to see rejection in her eyes if she declined. But Sophia clapped her hands together with the first real joy he'd seen from her in months, and her enthusiasm was infectious enough to lift even his battered spirits into something resembling hope. "Could we do that, Miss Ruby? Could you come to our house and tell me more stories about the nice dragon?" Sophia's eyes sparkled with anticipation, and Alexander realized this was what he'd been missing, his daughter's capacity for joy, her ability to love without reservation or calculation. He'd been so focused on protecting her from pain that he'd forgotten to nurture her happiness. Love required vulnerability, and vulnerability required courage he'd thought he'd lost forever. Ruby looked at Alexander, searching his face for sincerity beneath the expensive suit and carefully groomed exterior. "Mr. Kane, I don't want to impose on your life. I know you have your own routines, your own world." But there was longing in her voice, desperate hunger for connection that matched the ache in his own chest. They were all broken people here, all carrying pieces of a life that used to make sense before grief rewrote all the rules. Maybe broken people could help each other heal. Please, Alexander said, and the word came out rawer than he'd intended, stripped of all pretense and pride. I think we need you. I think Sophia needs you. And He paused, struggling with words that felt too big for his mouth, too honest for a man who'd built walls around his heart. I think I need to learn how to be the father Isabella wanted me to be. The father Sophia deserves to have. The admission cost him everything, left him naked as a newborn in truth's unforgiving light. Ruby studied his face for a long moment that felt like eternity, and Alexander held his breath, waiting for judgment that never came. Instead, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his, palm warm and calloused from honest work. Isabella used to worry that you'd forgotten how to let people help you, she said softly, voice carrying echoes of conversations he'd never heard. She said you thought love was something you had to earn instead of something you were born deserving. The words hit him like revelation, like lightning illuminating a landscape he'd never seen clearly. Isabella had understood him better than he'd understood himself, had seen the fear beneath his need for control, the wounded child hiding behind the successful man's facade. She was right, he admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to let people in anymore. I don't know how to trust that they won't leave me broken and alone. The confession felt like bleeding out in public, but also like the first honest breath he'd taken in 18 months. Everyone leaves eventually, Ruby said with gentle authority of someone who'd learned life's hardest lessons through bitter experience. Parents die, spouses die, teachers have to move on to new chapters. But love doesn't leave, Mr. Kane. Love just changes shape, becomes memory, becomes inspiration, becomes the voice in your head telling you to be better than you are. She squeezed his hand gently, anchor in the storm. Isabella's love for you and Sophia didn't end when she died. It just became your responsibility to carry forward. Sophia had finished her broth and was now nibbling star-shaped toast with genuine appetite, the first real food she'd eaten in days. Color had returned to her cheeks, and her eyes held more light than they had in months of accumulated sorrow. Miss Ruby, she said around a mouthful of bread, will you teach me how to make the dragon story end happy? Because in my dreams, the dragon is still sad sometimes, and I want to help him remember how to smile. Ruby's smile was like sunrise after the longest winter, warming corners of the room that had been cold for too long. Of course, little star. We'll write a new ending together, one where the dragon remembers that being strong doesn't mean being angry. One where he learns that the best kind of fire is the kind that warms hearts instead of burning them down. She looked at Alexander meaningfully, and he felt the weight of metaphor settling on his shoulders like a mantle. Dragons can change, you know. They just need to remember who they really are underneath all that armor. Alexander felt something shift inside his chest, like tectonic plates settling into a new configuration after months of earthquake tremors. The anger that had been his constant companion for 18 months suddenly felt foreign, like clothes that no longer fit his transformed body. Ruby, he said quietly, voice steady for the first time all evening. I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She nodded, brown eyes steady and patient as deep water. The question that came next would determine everything. Do you think Sophia could learn to trust me again? Do you think I could learn to be the father she needs, the man Isabella fell in love with? The words hung in air between them, fragile as soap bubbles and twice as important. Everything depended on her answer, on whether redemption was possible for men who'd lost their way in grief's labyrinth. Alexander held his breath, afraid to hope, afraid not to hope. I think, Ruby said carefully, weighing each word like precious metal, that little girls are remarkably forgiving when they see genuine effort. And I think fathers who ask those kinds of questions are already halfway to finding the answers they seek. She paused, studying his face with teacher's practiced eye for truth and deception. But it won't be easy, Mr. Kane. Healing never is for children or adults. You'll have to learn to put down the phone when she's talking. You'll have to learn that being present is more important than being productive. Alexander nodded, accepting the challenge like a man signing a contract with his soul, trading his old life for the possibility of something better. Will you help me? Will you teach me what Isabella would have wanted me to learn? The question hung in air between them, carrying the weight of second chance and new beginnings. Ruby looked at Sophia, who was humming quietly to herself as she ate, then back at Alexander with eyes that had seen too much loss to take hope lightly. I'll try, she said simply, words carrying the weight of promises and possibilities. For Isabella's memory, for Sophia's future, and maybe, if you're willing to do the hard work, for you too. The commitment felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man, and Alexander grabbed it with both hands, finally ready to stop fighting the current and learn to swim. For the first time since Isabella's death, he felt something that might have been hope beginning to stir in the wasteland of his heart. The restaurant had returned to its normal rhythm around them, conversations resuming their natural flow, silverware clinking against china in civilization's ancient music. But at table 12, 3 broken people were beginning the delicate work of becoming whole again, of learning that love could survive loss and grow stronger in the breaking. Alexander signaled for the check, but for once in his life, money felt like the least important thing in the room. As they prepared to leave, Sophia slipped her small hand into Ruby's weathered one and looked up at her father with eyes that held more wisdom than any 8-year-old should possess. Daddy, she said with the serious authority of childhood prophets, I think the dragon story is going to have a happy ending after all. And for the first time in 18 months, Alexander Kane believed in happy endings too, believed in the possibility of transformation, believed that broken things could be made beautiful again.